Thank you, Catherine. Okay, you might have to hit the got it button, everybody. So just so that you are consenting to that. And again, please do keep yourself on mute. If you have a question, put that in the chat box, but Catherine will monitor that. So we will get that information. As Catherine mentioned, I'm Dr. Bonnie Hennig Trestman. I have been part of the HD community and working with people who have Huntington's disease and their families. I counted for about 22, maybe 23 years right now. And I do wear a lot of hats in the community. So just real briefly with HD Reach, I'm the special programs director. I also have a clinic in the town that I'm reaching you from, and that is Roanoke, Virginia. So I'm the director of the Carilion Clinic Huntington's Disease Program. I'm also an assistant professor at the Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine there. And then some of the other work that I do in the HD community, I'm part of the board of directors for an organization called HDYO, the Huntington's Disease Youth Organization. And I'm the co-chair of the research committee there. I also work with the Huntington Study Group, and I am the co-chair of something called the Credential Committee. So I've been very involved in working with people with Huntington's disease and their families. So this talk today is law enforcement and HD. And you'll see that it's not just about talking to police and law enforcement. There's a lot of other things going on, and I'll show you the agenda. So we're going to, and I'm probably preaching to the choir a bit, and I understand that, but we're going to identify some symptoms associated with HD that might cause some interactions with law enforcement. I'm going to provide some suggestions to address these symptoms. We're going to learn to be proactive, and that's first going to be with family and friends. We're going to talk about some, what I call the don'ts and the do's. I will make recommendations to make law enforcement encounters somewhat successful, hopefully. We'll talk about interacting with law enforcement. And then there is a piece on caring for the caregiver, because I think that that's a very big part of all of this as well. So please know right away that not everyone with HD is going to have behaviors that will require law enforcement intervention. But my feeling, as you will see with this whole presentation, is very proactive. I feel that everyone in an HD family should be prepared with awareness, education, and a plan. So let's go back to those symptoms that most of you already know. And in the parentheses, I have what I call the 3 M's. And not just me, this is something taken from people from a long time ago. When I teach people about Huntington's disease and I ask them to tell me a little bit about it, sometimes they don't know. And I say, well, give me some examples. And then an easy way that I teach people, and this is something you can use with family, friends, and law enforcement, is that there are 3 symptoms of Huntington's disease. And if you put down those 3 fingers, that makes the letter M in American Sign Language. And that stands for movements, memory, and mood. It's just a helpful reminder. So some of the symptoms that might be a symptom that impacts involvement with law enforcement would be those involuntary movements, the staggering gait, the jerky movements, and some problems with speech. Then there is the memory, which we call cognitive or cognitive decline. Sometimes that's an inability to focus or disorientation. And then there's certainly the personality changes or mood, irritability, combativeness, or impulsivity. So let's look at those. In terms of the involuntary movements, there can be misunderstanding so that that person to you, to anybody else, to law enforcement can look like they are intoxicated or under the influence of any kind of drugs. So there's a misinterpretation right away that this person is violent or this person is under the influence of something. Also, the person with HD can act combative. And that just means if they're very excited or if they're trying to reach out to somebody because they have trouble controlling their movements, they might accidentally hit them. Now, that doesn't mean that they were gearing up and punching somebody intentionally, but just because of the movements, they might wind up hitting someone, touching somebody because they can't control their movements. And that might be an issue. And also that the person with HD doesn't engage in what we call normal social norms. So they might have poor eye contact. They might have some facial features that differ from what we call those social norms. In terms of memory, obviously there's dementia. So when people do have dementia, they can get lost. They might not be able to focus. They can get very overwhelmed and scared. And they might not be able to follow those simple directions that a person in law enforcement might say of, please stand over there, or please stop talking. Because in their mind, there's always that, yeah, but I have to explain what's going on. I have to tell you what's going on. And even though you tell me as a law enforcement person to stop, in my mind, I have a story to tell you. I need to tell you something, or my side of the story. So that can be very difficult for them. In terms of mood, and you'll see a few of these that are boldface, I'm going to go over those a little bit more. So we do sometimes have apathy, depression, agitation and aggression, anxiety, disinhibition, delusions and paranoia, and obsessive and compulsive symptoms. And that can really make an impact in terms of dealing with law enforcement, because people do have difficulty regulating these emotions, those mood swings that we call them. So when they're agitated or have explosive kind of symptoms or feel frustration, then that might be something that happens and causes some interactions with law enforcement. And that can result in verbal aggression, such as shouting, swearing, threats, and also physical violence. With disinhibition and impulse control, they could have difficulty controlling a sudden urge, such as, I'm in a store, I want something, I'm going to take it. Or even if that's with other people, touching somebody or saying something to somebody that's inappropriate. So there might be inappropriate behavior and hurtful behavior. And that's because some of these are decreased emotions. When we have these emotions such as shame, fear, or embarrassment, they stop us from doing things that we shouldn't do, such as we know we shouldn't steal or make rude comments or have self-destructive behaviors. But that's where that filter that a lot of us in the HD community talk about, the healthcare providers talk about, that sometimes people just don't have those things. So that filter is gone, and they might say something or do something that, if they didn't have Huntington's disease, they would know is not correct to do. So they also might have difficult controlling the want or need to spend money. And that might be, getting onto a computer and ordering things on a credit card, or even shoplifting. And in terms of delusions and paranoia, those are beliefs that are not true. There's no factual evidence, so that they could say a significant other is having an affair when there's no factual evidence to that. They can also feel that people are out to get them, or that people are spying on them. And I have to take a second to recognize that there was something I call the invisible symptom, or the fourth symptom of Huntington's disease, which makes all of these things much more difficult to work with that person who has Huntington's disease. And that's that fancy term called anosognosia. It's a Latin term for lack of knowing oneself. And it's caused by altered functioning in certain parts of the brain that constantly monitor how we act and behave. The way I teach people about this is, think of it as a temporary effect of alcohol use. The brain is temporarily knocked out. So we've all gone to a party or a dinner, and somebody has had too much to drink. And then all of a sudden they have, these behaviors. So they might be really close to you and not understand, the limits in terms of spatial awareness. They might say things like, I can drive, or you're my best friend, or, this is what we're going to do. That's kind of what it feels like sometimes to have Huntington's disease. That person isn't aware of these things that they're doing, but their brain is telling them that they're acting really appropriately when they're not. And it's really important to remember, as we talk about law enforcement, that some people fail to recognize their own uncontrollable movements, which sometimes is hard for family and friends to understand. Let's go back to that whole idea in terms of being intoxicated. If a police officer, a law enforcement person has a person who's driving pull over because they were weaving or doing something, really a safety issue, and asking them to walk tandem, which is that heel toe, their body is telling them that they're able to do that, but they're not actually able to do that. So again, that's how it feels sometimes to have some of these involuntary movements called chorea, dystonia, all these other types of movements. Some people are aware of some of them, but there are some people who are not aware of their movements. And some people fail to recognize that their behavior is inappropriate. Again, that they might say something or do something. And they also fail to recognize that their thinking process has been altered. So I always stop when I'm doing this talk, and when I'm doing this live especially, and hear what the audience has to say. We'll move forward because it'll be a little bit easier. But one of the questions I ask at this point is, what's the best way to deal with law enforcement? And I get lots of answers back. But really what I'm looking for is to avoid it. And that's what I'm going to focus on a little bit. And I don't think any of this is going to be really new to people, but it's something just to think about, maybe to validate, or maybe to try something that you haven't tried. Please remember that the person with HD usually isn't doing anything on purpose, usually. Many times they can't help it or they can't stop the behavior. So what can you do? You can try to avoid stressful situations or the trigger. Try not to get upset or yell at that person with Huntington's disease, because that will just escalate the situation. Try to stay calm and use simple and clear concepts. Try to use a gentle voice and be patient, even when they're yelling at you, perhaps. Don't try to argue or try to reason with a person. We say this a lot, that it's very hard to reason with somebody who can be unreasonable. Try to avoid physical contact with the person unless it is absolutely necessary that they're in a situation that is a safety risk. But if you please do try to keep hands off, even if they're in your face. Sometimes also you just need to leave the room or the house. And I know that can be difficult because I do have a lot of family members who say, but they follow me. But there has to be a way where you can, try to think about, can I just get away for a moment? You know what? You have to sit here. I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'm going to come back. We can discuss this. And definitely allow extra time to answer questions. And yes and no questions can be a lot more helpful versus what happened. It can be, it sounds like you're upset right now. Did something just happen between you and so-and-so? Yes or no? Okay, let's kind of figure out what this is. Ask one question at a time and wait for that answer. Also, it's really important to give the person your full attention. If you are arguing with somebody and you're doing something else, if you're putting away the dishes or trying to do something, it almost gives that message. It does give that message that I'm not really paying attention to you. And that happens without Huntington's disease. We all have relationships that you're doing something and you're upset and you're trying to get something else done. But if you take that moment and turn around and give that person your full attention, it says, I'm here for you. I'm going to listen to what you have to say. And it could be very helpful to reflect back what that person is saying. Okay, so you just told me that this person did something and you really didn't like it. Is that what's going on? Because you seem really angry. It is also very helpful to try to give the person with HD help right away. Now, as a caregiver, I understand that that can be very difficult. You can't just drop everything. But if there is a way to do that once in a while, so you can say, I'm going to help this person because I know they're revving up. I know I can feel and I can sense what's going on. So I'm going to stop what I'm doing now and try to address this situation. Also, it can be helpful to find someone the person has a good relationship with. A lot of times in families, there's that one really close person that the person with HD who does have some of these symptoms and they're aggressive to can really use that person as a figurative and literal punching bag. But there might be somebody else that they have a good relationship. It might be another family member. It might be a neighbor. It might be a coach. It might be a therapist. My only caveat with this is please try not to use a minor to do this. An adult child can be helpful. But when we start to use children in this situation, it does something called parentify them, and we really want to avoid that. And also think about the causes of distress. Why is there a trigger? Is that person scared? Are they hungry? Are they fatigued? Did they not get enough sleep? Are they dehydrated? Does medication have to be changed, or are they even taking their medication? Just because a physician prescribes medication doesn't always mean that the person is taking it. So it's really important to monitor some of these things. And if you can think of those things and say, okay, person didn't get enough sleep, they're really tired, they're really cranky. We call hangry also when they're hungry and they're angry. It gets really blown up and really exacerbated and exaggerated when somebody has Huntington's disease. So it might be really trying to make sure that there's a schedule there, which we will talk about. And also be proactive, not only for yourself, but teach family and friends about HD so they know to expect some of these behaviors. I recently worked with a family that they were all going to be going away, and there was a lot of extended family. And they all knew that the person who was going also had Huntington's disease, but hadn't seen him in a while. And I worked a long time with the wife to say, here's a time where you really need to send that email or to make these calls and to say, this is what he looks like now, and this is what he might do. And when you see me interacting with him, maybe telling a white lie, maybe doing something different that you might not agree with, these are the reasons why. And I did follow up with her after her vacation, and she said it was much better. People were aware. They knew what to do. They didn't feel awkward, and they were able to work with him as well. And it made the vacation so much better for everybody. And as I said, try to keep routines and daily schedules. People do better when they know what to expect. So this can be really helpful. Also, create a good working relationship with your HD team. If you don't have an HD team, please do contact us at HD Reach, or there's other organizations, HDSA, lots of different organizations that you can find a healthcare team. It might not be somebody around the corner, but now with telehealth and teletherapy, it might be helpful to connect with somebody. And contact the HD team when needed, and tell the person you're contacting them. A lot of times the people who are in clinics and different places who are HD advocacy groups, we might get a call from somebody to say, and the person says, living with this person is really difficult. We're all walking on eggshells. It's, all these things are happening, but please don't tell him or her that I called. And that makes it really hard for us to do our job. We know that things aren't good anyway. But if we can have that open conversation to say, you know what, things are just, and you're not blaming the person with HD, but just to be able to say to that person, things are really, not great lately. Everyone's walking on eggshells. We all have our tempers up, and you could feel the tension. I think it's time that we contact the HD program so that we can figure out what the issue is. And, if that person says, you're going to blame me, no, you're going to have your chance to talk to them as well. But I need to give some feedback because maybe I'm not doing something right, or maybe there's something we can do together. So the more that you're able to work with that person with Huntington's disease and say, we're going to call, you can give them the choice, which I'll talk about as well. You can say, you can be on the line with me or in the room with me, or you don't have to. I'm giving you that choice, but I do need to call because something isn't right here. So let's talk a little bit about the don'ts. And I know it's hard not to put something in the negative, but I will give you the do's as well. This is something just to remember. Try not to be rigid or controlling. When somebody is unrealistic or is demanding, it's very difficult for you to try to go in and be rigid and controlling as well. It might not be perfect of what's going to happen, but if you can be a little less rigid and controlling, it might make the situation a little bit better. In addition, don't be overly demanding or critical. These are really hard things. And I think even just working with young people, and I know there might be some people on the line who also have been staff at the HDYO camps, that I think it's really important when we're working with young people who want to be right, who want to say to a parent, but I didn't do that, or you don't know what you're talking about, or trying to explain to these young people. Sometimes you just have to say, oh, I'm sorry that if you thought that upset you, if what I did upset you, even if you didn't do it, but to be able to say, I'm going to do better next time, or we'll figure this out together. That's hard because, again, as a young person, and even people who aren't young people, you want to say, but that's not what you're saying is not correct. You want to correct them, but it really can just cause more of a controversy. So we try to teach people to not be rigid and controlling or demanding or critical. And don't get angry if the person with HD forgets. Again, I work with a lot of young people who say, she was supposed to do something or get something from me, and we talked about it and she said yes, and then she totally forgot. That's pretty common. So if you want to, it might be helpful to say, let's have this discussion. I'm going to send you a note or a text or even an email just so somebody has this to say, remember, you were supposed to get this for me for school or do this for work or something like that. So try to remember that forgetfulness can be part of Huntington's disease symptoms. And if you can be a little lenient on that and say, okay, let me follow up and try to remind this person. And please, please don't be aggressive back. If someone's aggressive to you, I know you want to be self-defensive, to defend yourself. And I know that sometimes it feels like that's the right thing to do because they're in your face, but the more you can back off, the better it's going to be. Let's talk about the do's. Give people with Huntington's disease in advance, 1 day in advance, if something is going to change. So if there's a doctor's appointment and you keep reminding them for weeks and weeks that there's a doctor's appointment coming up and they're anxious about it, that's going to carry on for all those weeks. But if you're the one controlling the schedule and you know what's going on, maybe to make the appointment, let it go, and then a day or two in advance to say, you got to be up at 10 o'clock today. So we're going to be going to the doctor. You have to be up 10 o'clock tomorrow. We're going to be going to the doctors. They might get anxious that one night, but that might be a little bit better. So if you give less notice, as long as it doesn't impede on their schedule, if they need notice, if they have to take time from work or do something, obviously they're going to need that. But for most things, you can give them a shorter period of time so that they're not getting anxious about something. And again, in terms of a routine, keep a constant routine if possible. People do much better with that. Sometimes even just trying to distract the person. And this is in conflict resolution without having Huntington's disease. If there's a conflict going on, you might be able to interject and say, hey, I think so-and-so wanted to talk to you, or we're doing something, or, there's a movie here we're going to be watching, or hey, why don't you take a look at this video? So sometimes distracting the person who's starting to become a little bit more upset and aggressive can be helpful. And try to give as much control as possible. Sometimes people get angry and aggressive and assertive because they don't feel like they have any more control of anything. And these can be little things, but make sure that they're real choices. So if you say, okay, we're going to go visit her today, tomorrow or the next day, which do you want? Oh, the next day? Well, I really wanted to go tomorrow. Then that defeats the purpose. If you can say to somebody, you have a choice. We can go on Tuesday or Wednesday. What is your choice? You want Wednesday? Okay, then that's when we're going to go. So it makes a person feel that they have some control, even if it's something small. Because we do know with Huntington's disease, one of the biggest things that we hear from people is that their lives are being taken away piece by piece. So if we can give them some control back and real choices, a lot of times it makes them feel a little bit better. So let's talk a little bit about some helpful tips. You want to maintain realistic expectations of what the person with HD can do. Avoid confrontation and avoid overly correcting the person as well. It's not going to be helpful in the long run. Try to be calm and gentle. Focus on positive behaviors. Focus on the things that they actually can do. And be consistent. So the object here is if a person with HD knows that eventually you give in, very much like a toddler who says, I want a cookie, I want a cookie, I want a cookie, that after the tantrum and after the 15th time that they say, I want a cookie, you give into that, then that's what you're teaching that toddler what to do. And the same thing holds true for Huntington's disease. If you break down and say, okay, finally, we'll do it like this, even if it's not helpful for that person, that's what they're going to remember, that you're going to teach them to use this aggression or to make sure that they're continually harping on you and bothering you for something. And eventually you're going to give in. And this takes time. And I understand that it's really hard to stand your ground, but I think it's really helpful to know that when you say no for something, it might be a safety issue. It might be for whatever reason that's a good reason, that you're able to say, we're not able to do that this time, but we're going to do it next time, or I'll help you in a little bit, or no, you can't have that, but we're going to be able to do this. And here's your choices here. That can be really helpful as well. So here's something I call the rules, and I let the person with HD know the rules ahead of time. And I inform, and I will tell you about this, what the rules are, and I inform the person of the consequences without threats and anger. And I do this in my office. So when I know that somebody might have some aggression, some irritability, might have, that what I call a short fuse, what I talk about is that the rule is that if a person in the family feels that they are threatened or that there's a safety issue or that you're putting yourself at risk, and I'm talking to the person with HD, that they're going to need to call somebody for help. And I think it's really important to do this when a person is not in a situation where they're upset, because once you're upset, it's kind of like when you are upset about something and someone is screaming, calm down to you. That's not going to help the person. That's not going to help you either. But if you can say, okay, there are going to be consequences. So I understand that there's some aggression here. I'm hoping that we can help with other things such as maybe medication. But if the person is in a situation that there's a safety issue, I'm going to need to get out and get myself to a place that I'm safe and to call somebody to help. And that might be 911. So again, I go over these rules with people in my office when it's not an issue, when it's not aggression or a behavioral issue, so that everybody knows what the rules are. So the most important thing is safety first, above all of this. Absolutely, if you are threatened, scared, abused, or think that that person with HD is putting themselves in a dangerous situation, number one is safety. Get yourself away and call 911 right away. So let's talk about calling 911. I have heard people use 911. If you don't calm down, I'm going to call the police. That's a threat. So if somebody is already agitated to a point where you think that you need to call 911, you just do that. But you can certainly say, I think, I tried all these other things, and I need you to try to settle down a little bit. If you can't, I'm going to leave you here. I hope that you're going to be okay. I'm going to get myself out. You don't need to go through that. But please, the point is, don't use, I'm going to call 911 as a threat. Try to use it to set limits. And if you're in the situation where it's needed, make the call. So if the person with HD is what I call out of control, meaning again, that they're in danger of hurting themselves, you, others, or if they're destroying property, then you need to get yourself somewhere safe and call 911. I tell people, I know we don't want to be attached to our cell phones or computers, but always do try to have a phone on you and make sure that it is charged. You want to be able to get yourself out to a neighbor, someplace safe, and be able to call 911 and give them information. Please do know that making that call, calling for help, can be scary, but sometimes it is necessary. And I really do try to explain to people that sometimes when you call 911, you might get somebody who does not know what Huntington's disease is. A lot of times that happens. We'll talk about ways to avoid that. And it might be that that person with Huntington's disease who you love might be taken away in handcuffs. I'm telling people that not to scare them, but just to know that we're going to try to do everything we can with the rest of this talk, to be proactive and to educate law enforcement. But sometimes that perfect world does not happen. So sometimes there's going to be somebody who's going to come in and is going to be aggressive back, a law enforcement person who's going to be aggressive back, and it's going to look very, very scary. So if you're by yourself, if you have children, if you have other people, know that that is a possibility. But sometimes it is necessary. If you are in a situation that is important for you to call 911, you do need to do that. So let's talk about being proactive with law enforcement. If you live with somebody who has Huntington's disease, I strongly suggest that you contact your local police and explain the situation. You have somebody with a neurodegenerative disease, and you're trying to educate law enforcement or anybody around you who might be involved with this person so that they can be more familiar with Huntington's disease. You want to try to form a relationship with at least one person in that force. So there are things like CIT, so a crisis intervention team. And a lot of times, certainly if you are in the North Carolina area or the catchment area for HD Reach, you can contact us and we can try to give you information in terms of those CITs who are in your area. But that's something you can Google, and you can, again, go down to your local police precinct, your law enforcement, and say, do we have a crisis intervention team here? And who are those people? And I'd like to make an appointment with them. Again, this is well before any kind of a crisis, and the hope is that you will never need this. But if you do, you know names and you know information that you've already given to that CIT officer or officers. Teach them about HD, bring in the pamphlets. There are lots of programs out there. HDSA has programs. Help for HD has their LEAP program. Bring in whatever you can to explain what Huntington's disease is. Even if it's just to one pair of ears that is willing to sit down and listen to you, it's going to be worth it. Create a profile for the person with HD as well. Again, this is not when there is a crisis. This is well before, including a recent photo, a list of their medication, all family contacts who could be connected, they could be connected with, their medical team. And remember, if there's an emergency, you don't need a release of information. You can freely speak to your healthcare team, or the law enforcement personnel can speak to a healthcare team without having to worry about getting a release of information. So have all of that information updated. And it can be really helpful to have tips to help calm the person with HD. So that might be their favorite programs or their favorite videos or music or certain foods. This can be really helpful for the law enforcement to know, and just part of that profile that you have. Carry what I call an I have HD card, or carry a caregiver's emergency card. Catherine's going to be putting a link for the card that we have at HD Reach, and I'm going to show you a card that I use at Carilion Clinic. So this is a card that can be sent to you or is downloaded from my website at Carilion Clinic. But again, if you do want information and have these cards, similar cards, sent out to you from HD Reach, just contact us. They're a tiny bit different, but the idea is the same. So the I have Huntington's disease card is a foldable card that is about business size. And it basically talks about, I have Huntington's disease, a little bit about HD, and who can be contacted if somebody finds this person and finds the card. Caveat is that when there is an EMT, firefighters, law enforcement, that what they are able to do is to look at risks, because you're going to be taking pulse and your neck. So certainly having some kind of a medical alert bracelet or something like that would be really helpful. Usually people are not allowed to go through people's wallets. However, if you do have a wallet and you're unconscious and they're trying to find next of kin or somebody in an emergency room can do that. So it's important to know, maybe the laws are changed in your area, but I think having this HD card, because even I've given this to people who, when they are pulled over or ask questions from somebody in authority, they can pull this out and say, I have Huntington's disease, and show this card. Also, the person who helped me create this was a caregiver. He was an offender bender and he was fine, but he got to thinking, and he was a graphic designer. He got to thinking, what would happen if I was in an accident and I lost consciousness and my loved one is home and I'm the primary caretaker? So he came up with a caregiver emergency card that basically says, I have somebody with Huntington's disease at home, please have someone check on them. And it has a lot of information. So I really encourage people to carry these around. And I give these out like candy when people come to our clinic, so that people have a lot of these on them. So what we need to know in terms of law enforcement. Please do know that the police do need to protect themselves and others. And I'm not going to get into all kinds of political stuff with what's going on with police and all of that. All I'm saying is, when you get into the mindset of somebody who's law enforcement, when they first come out, they're thinking there's a safety issue here and they need to protect themselves, the people around them, and then the person that they're called to talk to. So that's where their perspective is coming from. Not, I have to find out if there's a physical problem going on or a cognitive problem. So if the person with HD is not able to calm down again, they might need to restrain them. A lot of times what happens, however, is that once law enforcement shows up, sometimes that person with HD is able to calm down, is able to just, to get to a place where they feel calm. Sometimes they get intimidated when there's law enforcement, but I have had people who have not been able to calm down. And again, and I'm not trying to sugarcoat this, I'm trying to educate you. They have been taken away in handcuffs. It can be traumatic to them and to other people, but I want to let you know that this is something that can happen, because sometimes there are those misunderstandings, or the police officer is really afraid that that person is going to harm themselves or others. So again, try to be proactive. Tell the police that the person has HD and they need to go to the hospital. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes they bring them down to the police station. Again, we're trying to avoid all of these things, but again, I want you to be aware of things that do happen. The more that you educate the local teams, law enforcement, even people in the hospital, the better they will be able to know what to do to help. So you might be somebody who has your HD team miles away, maybe hours away, but that your local hospital is 10 minutes away, yet they don't have a specialist for Huntington's disease. I still think it's helpful to have a relationship with somebody, because that's where that person's going to go. So if you contact somebody at the hospital, in the emergency room, in psychiatry, or somebody to say, if this happens, my loved one is going to come here and you're not going to know who they are. How can I have a relationship with somebody so that I can talk to somebody and they'll have a file to be able to bring up. So these are all proactive things. Please do know that it is difficult sometimes for law enforcement to tell the difference if somebody has a physical, cognitive, or behavioral issue and that they're impaired, versus that they're under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or that they're just a violent person. So again, the first thing that they're thinking is not, I wonder if they have Huntington's disease. So this is where when I do education to law enforcement, I say to them, you can ask questions. You can certainly ask, as police officers do, have you been drinking or have you been using drugs? If the person says no, what I teach them to do is to continue asking questions. So you can say, you seem to be moving a lot, or you're slurring your words, or you don't seem to be, you seem to be not able to focus. Is there something going on? That's sometimes the issue, that they say, no, they haven't been using alcohol or drugs, and then it stops, and people are like, okay, then they're a violent person or they're out of control. So I'm trying to teach law enforcement to keep asking questions. And if they do ask these questions, it allows that person to say that they have the illness. Now, I do realize that with that anosognosia, that not all patients can or will disclose, but there have been lots of times where family members are really surprised that if a person in authority does interact with that person, even though in the past they've said, I don't have Huntington's disease, sometimes with law enforcement, they'll say, I have an illness called HD or Huntington's disease. So if they're able to explain that, sometimes the outcome can be different. And that's where education starts, so that we can teach law enforcement that that person might not be able to stand over there or to stop talking or be quiet, that they might be able to, if they are a CIT or somebody who is aware, say, okay, I need to let this person tell me their story. Then they're going to calm down and I can reflect back. So as social workers, and I know that there are social workers who have signed up for this, we're always taught to be where the person is. But that's what I try to teach law enforcement. Be where the person with HD is and ask lots and lots of questions. So my last part is caregiver tips. I know that caregiver burden can lead to psychological stress, such as depression, anxiety, and can affect your immune system and increase your blood pressure. And as caregivers, you need to find a place to recharge your battery. It's really important, because if you are not taking care of yourself and you are overstressed, when you're dealing with somebody who has some of these symptoms, it is going to be so much harder. And I do understand that caregivers, especially now and during pandemic and COVID, are overtaxed and are overwhelmed. If there is a way that you can take a little bit of time out of your 24-hour day, I urge you really to do that. So many caregivers I work with will come home from work after a full day of stress at work, walk in the door, and then they continue to get bombarded with demands and all kinds of things. I have taught so many caregivers that when you get in that car, that you drive someplace for just 15 minutes, that you put on a tape just to do some meditation, you relax, you set an alarm to read a book for 10 minutes, do something just to calm yourself down, so that even in that short period of time, you can rejuvenate your battery just a tiny bit so that you're ready. Because if you walk in the door and all of a sudden all these demands are on you and that person's screaming and you're screaming back, that's a recipe for disaster. But if you can come in and that person's demanding and you can be a little bit more zen and say, I'm going to listen to you, but now I need my, a little bit of time, or this is what I have to do. We're trying to be proactive and figure out what works for you. I know it's difficult. I really do, but I urge you to take care of yourself. Sometimes it's about joining a caregiver support group. I also know from lots of people that there's a lot on the internet that isn't support, that they just become a complaint session. I urge you again to really find a caregiver support group that has professionals that at least monitor that group. Not every single group on Facebook and all these other social medias are really healthy. A lot of times it's just this person's complaining, there's this going on, a lot of complaining. But with a good support group, and I've run caregiver support groups for 2 decades, it's about sharing information. And sometimes people say, well, it's depressing. Well, once in a while it can be. But there's nothing like somebody else who says, I know exactly what that feels like. I'm not a caregiver. I don't have HD in my family. I can help to listen. But when there's other people who have walked the walk that you have, it is so much nicer to be able to say, I know what that feels like, and to feel validated, or to have someone say, I tried this, or I felt guilty, or, I found something that helps me. Maybe this tip will help you as well. That could be really, really rewarding and make you feel not alone. So find good support people and or a therapist that you can talk to. It could be once a month that you check in with somebody. You might not have a lot that you are planning to say, but all of a sudden just saying how your day is going, or what's going well or what's not going well, and being able to have that therapist hold some of that for you can really be very, very helpful. And that's a lot of what I do with caregivers. As I said, try to take personal time to care for yourself. This is really important. Even if it's 15 minutes, there are lots of free apps that you can download that'll give you 15 minutes of just calm, where you can listen to some Zen music, you can just meditate, you can just relax. Those kinds of things can really lower blood pressure and really help you to take care of yourself. It might be a first step, but I urge you to do that. Please do try to get some sleep. Everyone is right now just bombarded with being on Zoom calls and social media and all kinds of things. I really do urge people to try to log off from their being plugged into technology about a half an hour before bedtime, and really just start to have your body kind of calm down so that you're not going to sleep after all this uplifting and racing kind of thoughts, even if they're good, but just to unplug, try to get some sleep, try to eat right and exercise. And please do go to your own doctor for checkups. And these are preventative care, not just when something is bad, but go to all of those checkups for your dentist and your doctor to take care of yourself. If you're not healthy, you're not going to be able to take care of other people. Caregivers really do need to have their own care. It is a very hard job to do, especially when the person with HD can be negative, self-centered, or abusive. Not everybody is, and not everybody is all the time. Sometimes we do feel that way once in a while. It is very difficult when you don't feel appreciated or your loved one doesn't say thank you all the time. So do know as a caregiver, if you're a caregiver out there, that you do matter and that it's really important to take care of your own needs. Caregivers should get respite and go out. I know sometimes that's difficult, but you really do need to recharge your battery once in a while. And it's okay to want to have a life, even if the person with HD is home. It's important also to remember that even if you're a parent of someone who has HD, your intention was not to give your children HD or that if they're at risk. I know that's a huge burden, but these are not something you've done on purpose. Even if you are somebody who knew about HD and then had children, that still doesn't mean that your intention was to say, I'm going to hope that this gene passes down. Of course not. We're also hoping for cures. We're hoping for treatments. So it's really important as a caregiver that if you're having some of this guilt, if you're having some of this shame, whatever your emotion you're feeling, please do talk to someone. There are people out there. Sometimes you need to find us. We try to find you, but we do suggest that you do talk to somebody to help you with some of those emotions and for the coping skills. And a final word, remember that symptoms of HD, including agitation and irritability, are the disease, not the person. If you're able to put that, onto this behavior, all of these emotions into Huntington's disease and not the person, that can be a way to rework this in your mind. The people impacted by HD are you, your family, and your loved one with Huntington's disease. A lot of times we say the person with symptoms is the person affected by Huntington's, but the impact is very, very wide. You don't have to be at risk. You don't even have to be a blood relative or a significant other. You can be a little bit further out and still be impacted by Huntington's disease, so that everyone is equally important in terms of the care that they need. And if you take care of yourself, you can better take care of that person with HD. So I hope that you did find this helpful. I don't know, it doesn't look like there's much in the chat room, but if there are questions, you can certainly write them in the chat room, or you can unmute yourself, and I'm happy to take a couple of questions. We still have about 10 minutes to go.
Hi, Bonnie. Hi, I'm a social worker. I run an HD clinic, Center of Excellence via the HDSA in New Orleans. And I just started this gig a few months ago, so I'm still really learning the ropes of everything. What I really liked your tip of contacting crisis intervention services before this even happens, before an incident happens. I've had patients that have gotten caught up in psychiatric holds and that kind of process, and psychiatric institutions not knowing what to do with these patients. Yeah. Is there any way that you've found that really works in terms of advocating for these people, especially with institutions that are I don't know, just kind of big monsters in themselves?
Yeah. I think, thank you, Anne-Marie. I think that's great. And welcome to the HD community. I think that, again, a lot of it can be being proactive. However, when I have had people who are in facilities that really don't know a lot about HD, it's about getting a release of information and seeing if there's somebody I can talk to. It could be somebody in an emergency room. It could be somebody on a unit. It could be the social worker there as another social worker talking to that person and just saying, hey, by the way, I would like to give some information about HD, or this is what's going on. Or did you know, as I said, that this person sees somebody in our clinic, even though they're closer to you for urgent care or emergency care, I want to be able to give some of this information. So I think a lot of times those types of facilities really do appreciate when somebody with education about or awareness and information about Huntington's disease educates them, just to be able to say, hey, we're going to follow up, or what type of medication are they on, and we're going to make sure that the medical director of our center interacts with whoever the director is on, who's taking care of them. So it's physician to physician or nurse to nurse. But again, sometimes as a social worker, to be able to say, okay, I understand that that person is in your unit. I've worked with that person. Here's information about Huntington's disease. Sometimes you do get that caring ear who's able to say, oh, okay, and is able to relay that information back to the team to say, oh, this person is going to be working, with this center, or they're known to this person, or I have information about Huntington's disease that I want to give to everybody that they had given to me. Does that help out a little bit, Anne Marie?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of like finding an individual.
Yeah,
and that's been it's harder to do it kind of. I feel like I've learned, because I worked with people and families with dementia prior to this, and just how sort of unaware, uneducated people are about how neurodegenerative diseases affect people's behaviors and emotions. So yeah, I'm just kind of trying to brainstorm better ways to really get that sort of information out there to professionals even.
Absolutely. And I would definitely start with the family. So when we do have people who are in, a different facility, and maybe they don't even have psychiatric care at all, and they're, on a medical unit, and they're just pumping this person full of medication. It's about really working with the family first and saying, here's some information. But it is, as social workers, we're detectives. We try to be able to say, okay, can you give me a release of information? Sometimes that's dicey because the person who is in the facility has to be the one to do a release of information, and that can be a little difficult. But it's just about, really trying to make sure that there's a continuity across the board, so that when I have people who see a psychiatrist outside of my clinic, I make sure right from the get-go that I get a release of information. So nothing has happened, and I'm not always going to contact that person. But when I do have that release of information, I can certainly do a checkup and just say, hey, this is who I am, which I do tend to do. But when there is a crisis, I can reach out to that person because I already have a release of information and say, just so you know, this is what I can provide. And I'd love to be able to, give some information to you about Huntington's disease. It's hard. It's definitely difficult for families as well as people in the HD community who want to educate other people. But I think that what you're doing is great. If you can reach out to at least even one pair of ears to say, I have information that could be helpful in terms of interacting with this person. And also when the person is discharged, I'm the person that, you can contact to say, this is what's going on. If the person is in there for long term, then again, I try to at least have one person, a nurse manager, somebody that I check in with pretty much between 1 month and 3 months. 1 month if things are a little dicey, and 3 months to say, hey, I'm just putting that call again. I want to make sure that that person is doing okay. So those would be my suggestions.
Well, thank you.
Anybody else? Anything else? And I think there's probably going to be people who are going to see this sort of on demand. So I think that that's fine, and that works for people. And if you are, seeing this not live, on demand, please do reach out to us. I think that the survey will continue to be valid, so that you can click on, if you're watching this after the live presentation, just to let us know if there's anything else that would be helpful to for us to address. A lot of this is not silver bullets. It's not a holy grail. It really is just trying to be proactive and working with people in the community for continuity. And as I said, to educate people.
Thank you, Dr. Bonnie. I think this is all really practical and applicable information. So I'm glad that we will have a record of it. I'm going to just stop the recording in just a moment. So any last questions? I don't see anything in the chat. So